Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about cybercrimes and cybersecurity, or rather, let's say, about cybersecurity from the criminal law perspective. This is something where, first of all, one should point out that there is a question of definitions. It's not at all very clear what is actually cybercrime. We have a convention. It's a Council of Europe created Convention on Cybercrime from 2001, which entered into force in 2004. It has about 50 parties, a little bit less, I think. So it's a significant convention. It does contain some definitions. Countries that are parties to the convention and also some others may have some of these definitions in their legislation, but not necessarily, and there may also be different definitions. So I'll explain a little bit why this is maybe a bit more complicated than what it may look like. A number of countries introduce cybercrime legislation. This is not actually necessary, and it may not even be a good idea. And in Estonia, for example, where we have a very advanced e-society, we do not have a specific law on cybercrime, but the provisions on cybercrime are in the criminal code. The reason to have or not to have separate legislation may be found in legal traditions of that country. For instance, in common law jurisdictions, there sometimes isn't a criminal code as such, and then it may be necessary to make some special law on cybercrimes. But if there is a criminal code, I would say most often it's actually better to introduce cybercrime provisions in that code. So what is then a cybercrime? Well, let me give you a small, maybe almost a silly example of why it's not possible to just define cybercrimes as any crime using a computer. Because what if you took a computer and hit somebody on the head with it? Would that make it a cybercrime? You're actually using a computer to commit a crime, but I think still nobody would consider that a cybercrime. So that's why the definition has to be a bit more sophisticated than just something using a computer. Another example, we have the crime of fraud. Fraud using computers, electronic fraud, internet fraud, is a big problem. It's something that goes on a lot, and there are damages caused all over the world to lots of people, to companies, etc. Fraud, however, is not a new crime. Fraud exists for a long time, and most countries would have legislation against fraud. It's also possible still to commit fraud using different means. It's just that internet has made it easier to, for instance, defraud lots of people all over the world. We don't have any costs really in contacting lots of people. A lot of internet fraudsters will target a huge undefined group, and then if only a few of those people actually catch on, it may be worth it. So this is new. We don't have the cost of contacting people, sending out letters, or the need to physically contact people. But the crime of fraud, what it is that is criminal, should be criminalized, and so that isn't new. So by having provisions on cyber fraud in the same legislation as any fraud means that we can use existing definitions, existing knowledge about what fraud is, also existing case law to determine what is actually fraud. It means to trick somebody into giving up some money or something else like that. All of that can remain the same, and the internet part of it just becomes a tool for committing that crime. There are many other such examples as well. So if we have legislation on cybercrimes together with other legislation on criminal law, we don't create these parallel words for special issues that actually should be the same. We manage to have a more, let's say, technology-neutral legislation where it's actually how something is done. It's just a mechanism, a tool. It's not what actually determines whether this is criminalized and how it should be punished and so. Also some things like, say, for instance, whether preparation of a crime should be criminalized, what mitigating circumstances there may be. All of those things can then be used from the general criminal legislation, including the case law on it, rather than creating something entirely new. However, we do have some things that are special in the cyber world, and these certain crimes, activities need to be regulated because they did not exist before. And I'm thinking here of, say, hacking, for instance, where actually the crime consists of breaking into some electronic network or system and doing something there. Maybe actually the end result is theft or fraud or something, but the way of doing it and the actual crime starts by something which is new, which is the way the technology is used. So these new occurrences need special rules. And whether to have those in a separate law or have them in the general criminal code, as I said before, it's a matter of taste. But this is something that needs special regulation. So to sum up, I would say that first of all, when looking at cybersecurity from the criminal law viewpoint, the first thing is to analyze the criminal legislation to see what of the existing law that can be used the way it is or with some additions, and then what is it that isn't covered, and then decide whether to make an addition to the criminal code, which may often be the preferred version of how to do it, or, and as I said, there may be reasons for that depending on different countries, to make a separate law for those things which are very special for the cyber world when it comes to committing crimes. So thank you for your attention.